to play or not to play a tank in Dragonflight?
That is the question.
What tank to play? Why should you play a Blood Decay? What about a Prot Paladin, a Vengeance Demon Hunter? We'll answer that for you today in a very special tier list just based on why you should or should not play these tanks in Season 2 of Dragonflight. Flame?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, we're not gonna look at the meta stuff because I know it's like Prot Paladin. So just get Prot Paladin, right? Not everybody pushes to the highest of content, and we're gonna have eventually tier lists for that as well when it comes to tanks. But we're gonna look at it from like a main perspective as someone who maybe you haven't tanked before yet, and you're like, okay, well, why should I tank with this and not with that? And maybe you're not interested in pushing as high as possible, but just have some fun and actually learn how to tank and do some, 16s to get your aspect crest.
Yeah, and you can always support this type of content on our Patreon, patreon.com/MarcelianOnline. There's a bunch of goodies there, like wallpapers for your character, Patreon bloopers, Patreon exclusive podcast as well. Not to mention the ultimate goal, supporting the Marcelian Online ongoing river of cool videos. So check it in the description, patreon.com/MarcelianOnline. That being said, let's go with Blood Decay. Now, Blood Decay is a peculiar one because if you fuck up, you will get punished. One more thing, if the healer doesn't really know how Blood Decays actually work, you will feel like a ping pong for a lot of times. It may be problematic.
Yeah,
and it's not. Is it the easiest to get into?
It depends. It depends on how you look at it, because in Dragonflight, and especially in Season 2, after they've bumped the HP and everything, Blood Decay is probably one of the best tanks that have benefited from that. You actually don't really need a healer whatsoever, almost at all, unless you're out of runic power, and in that case you have to keep in mind that. But that's probably where the difficulty of Blood Decay goes, where you probably won't see this with other tanks. Runic, if you don't have runic power and you're getting hit, you're going to die. Because if your HP yo-yos a lot and your hero's like, oh, this tank can handle himself, I'm just gonna, take care of everybody else, then you're, again, going to die. Keeping in mind, making sure that you regenerate runic power properly, spreading your death and decay with your heart strikes and all of that stuff comes with a little bit of practice. It's not particularly difficult, but it is a little bit different than what you might expect for a tank to do.
Yeah, the runic power management is definitely one of the biggest things you have to be aware of. I wouldn't say it deals that amount of damage as compared to some other boys on the list here, and for some people that is very important. I mean, I know a couple of other specs that sometimes struggle with aggro, specifically when paired up with like very bursty comps. This is more in dungeons than in the raid for sure. But yeah, I
think right now it has the lowest amount of damage out of all of the tanks. And although if you just start out and you're just having some fun with your friends, that's fine. Or you're trying to get into pugs, that's fine. But if you get gear DPS, you're going to lose aggro. If you're gonna lose aggro, DPS will die, and that kind of matters. You're probably gonna have to get stuff like Spirit Boon that I personally use on my low gear DK. Otherwise, I won't be able to keep aggro with this nerd over here. So that's the kind of stuff that you need to think of. So it's not particularly. I wouldn't necessarily recommend Blood Decay if you're fine with whatever you go as your first, let's say, tank experience.
Yeah. It still has like its HPS going on for it, so that may be something you would be attracted to and start playing it. But yeah, we will place it into a B tier in terms of like should you or should you not play. It's kind of like middle ground-ish, not very convinced, at least for like new players getting into tanking.
Sure.
Okay. Now, Brewmaster, I'll just say it right off the bat, Brewmaster, if handled correctly, this could potentially be the best deck all around.
Yeah.
However, in order to handle a Brewmaster correctly, there's a lot of things you have to be aware of, and you have to be mechanically on point.
Savvy.
With all of it.
Brewmaster underwent an interesting journey in Dragonflight, and it's now the most complicated tank and the most difficult tank to play with the most amount of buttons. It has gotten all of the buttons, and ideally, I think one of the best or better builds rather for Brewmaster is to take all of the buttons, and you just have a lot of buttons. Did I mention that you have a lot of buttons? Listen, you're going to be a piano master by the time you finish with Brewmaster, but it does have some things that you need to keep in mind of. Sure, we might not recommend it as highly as other options here, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't play it. But if you do decide to play it, keep in mind that you are probably one of the squishiest tanks out there. That doesn't mean you cannot handle it. You have a lot of sustain through expel harm, which is crazy good right now, especially if you're taking amounts of damage. I don't think that's normal for a general Brewmaster design, so likely that will change over the course of the expansion, but I would expect that to change with some more tankiness built in. Either way, you're still going to be able to survive, but you do need to know exactly how you're going to do that. You don't have a plethora of cooldowns and stuff like that, but it is a busy tank, and if you're just starting out right now, you might want to take it a little bit simpler.
Yeah. There's definitely an option to go for a much simpler build, but it will sacrifice a lot of like the capabilities of Brewmaster. Plus, like you really have to understand the stagger mechanic of it and so on. Again, same argument as with Blood Decay. Not all healers understand how Brewmasters work, and they may panic and use cooldowns where they don't need to, and stuff like that happens. But in terms of its like accessibility and the time it takes for you to master a Brewmaster Monk, we would place it in C tier. We love the spec. It's not about
really cool.
you know, how much we love it and we just don't rank it high. It's just if you like thinking of getting into tanking or wondering what tank you should start off on, then it will probably be the last option on your list.
Probably.
Yeah. If you enjoy like a challenge and really like complicated stuff and all of that, then sure, this should be an S tier for you. But the majority, I believe, are looking for something a little bit more easygoing at first. Now, speaking of Guardian Druid. Now, Guardian Druid traditionally was kind of like the easiest, quote-unquote, easiest tank to play. We are looking at a couple of positive changes along the way. Hopefully, a lot more is going to come. I think Guardian had a rough journey during Dragonflight.
I think it's one of the tanks that has been addressed the most with changes, with talent swaps, with
just make the final good changes.
Well, to be fair, although we're doing this in the scope of 10.1, in 10.1.5, Guardian is getting a lot of good stuff, a lot of the stuff that people have been asking for. So we're gonna kind of take that into consideration a little bit because it does end up mattering. But what Guardian does really well, it's keeping its simplistic form, and it's very akin to Prot Warrior, which is a tank that makes sense, where you put up Iron Force to soak up damage, you put up Bark Skin to take less damage, you heal with Frenzy Regen, and you deal damage with Maul, Swipes, and Thrash. It makes sense. You're not that mobile, which I guess it doesn't really matter because you have one of the highest HPs, you definitely have the highest armor out of all the tanks, making melee attacks, which is something that tanks kind of dread in Mythic Plus. Whenever you're doing fortified weeks, that's usually what crushes a lot of new tanks. They're not ready for it. Bear makes it a little bit easier because you're just gonna spam a lot of Iron Force, specifically if you play the current build that's played with the Thorns of Iron, where you deal damage by spamming Iron Force, and you're a Druid. It does have a lot of Druid things, because we can also talk, like we talked about the other two, but we haven't actually talked about how easy it is to get into groups. Bear might not have the easiest time getting into groups.
That's also true.
Neither does Blood and Brew, but if you do end up getting into groups, or let's say if you're making your own group, either it's a raid group or it's a Mythic Plus, you have a lot of utility to help your party. You have Stampeding Roar to boost their speed, you can resurrect them, which is also really good, and it's very simple to do all of that. It's kind of like the Beast Mastery of tanks, where your rotation is fairly simple, so you can focus on mechanics, focus on understanding like, okay, how do I want to pull a pack? How do I want to tank that boss? All of that stuff. It makes it easier if your spec has the intro level bar a little bit lower.
Oh, for sure. I think with Guardian Druid, it's basically a matter of maintaining your Iron Force like constantly and being aware more of the encounter when you know, getting the timing right to pop Iron Force and bark skins and stuff like that. It's more like, okay, the buttons are like accessible and easy to use, not too much like complicated synergies between them. So as a Guardian, you really have to be a lot more aware of what's happening within that fight or that dungeon or that, you know, situation you're in order to press it correctly. So that being said, I guess this is an S tier because easy to get into.
It also has a lot of damage, with definitely.
Oh yeah, damage is also very good. So not to make it, but if you like, a lot of people like suffer from tank anxiety or whatnot, or like have like the imposter syndrome or whatever. I know I had it like with my tanking spec. But this is the thing with Guardian. It's easy to overcome that. So this is why we're placing it into S tier. Okay. Protection Paladin. Speaking of the devil, Protection Paladin, I think once again retains like this notion of like a Swiss Army knife. It has so many tools to deal with shit. It's I had a discussion with Flame regarding like, you know, Prot Warrior and Prot Paladin, and I feel like Prot Paladin is the least punished just because it has access to so many tools. Like if you mess up in some situation, you still have some sort of a response to that mistake you made.
That definitely helps when there's somebody that picks up the spec. There is quite a few tools, and it kind of matters how you use them. Don't bop yourself, by the way. Don't do it.
No. Use bop on some other team member. The thing about Prot Paladin is it's not an easy tank. It's easy to get into. Okay, so it kind of makes sense. But it takes quite a long time to master it and play it properly. This is because it does have some intricacies between its talents and its abilities and the things you have to maintain and have to watch out for. Sometimes, even I kind of played it consistently since Season 2 start, even I sometimes forget about my consecration, which is huge.
That's very big.
It's huge, right? So it's fun. Gigafun, I think, is one of the funnest and one of the best looking tanks.
For sure.
Because it's Paladin.
The sound of Avenger shields shooting out.
There's nothing compared to Avenger shield. It does stupid amount of healing. I think this is one of the best tanks to have if your healer gets in trouble a lot, because it heals, it off heals a lot. I don't know, man. Utility-wise, it has it all.
That's the thing, because we were debating if this should be S tier or not. There's quite a few things going on with Prot Paladin, and over the years, it's been known to be one of the more complicated specs to master, because you do have a lot of tools, and it's good that you have a lot of tools, but you also need to know how and when to use them, how to rotate them. You kind of need to understand. If you do get all of this, obviously it's the best tank in the meta.
Oh yeah, it's
dungeons. I don't know if it's in raid the best. But it is one of the better tanks right now in terms of design. You kind of you're able to deal with anything basically.
Yeah, it's the Swiss Army knife, as I said. So because it takes a lot more time for you to master it 100%, we'll place it into A tier, and it is in A tier because it's easy to get into, and it really helps out if you're starting tanking and you have you do stupid shit in a dungeon or a raid. You have a lot of tools to compensate for that. This is why Prot Paladin is A tier plus damage. The damage is ridiculous.
Oh my god,
it's ridiculous. Okay, let's switch it up to Prot Warrior.
Prot Warrior. Now, with Prot Warrior, over the years, it used to be the most complicated and harder tank to play in terms of the mechanical implications of keeping up your defensives. It's not as complicated to play now, however, similar to although it's easier than Prot Paladin and probably easier to master as well, it's slightly squishier, and it still suffers from magic damage, which is probably why, even though it's doing a couple of things better than Prot Paladin, it doesn't go higher. It has a lot of damage, not as much as Prot Paladin, but it does have, as far as tanks go, it has probably the best defensives out there. You have... for actual damage that is coming that you need to mitigate it, you have Spell Reflect for either a Reflect, Deflect, or magic damage reduction. You have Spell Block to actually block magic damage, and you block a lot of it, because obviously Prot Warrior has a lot of block. You actually have block, so we go back to when we talked about the bear with the Iron Fur. Block is probably the next best thing, although probably even better than just raw armor, because you just block a lot of the melee attacks, and there are some attacks that are sometimes, depending on the seasons, depending on the dungeons and the raids, the way they're doing it, even some magic damage abilities can be blocked if they're tied to a melee swing that the target does. Usually you can block those as well, which is something that no other... I mean, Prot Paladin can do it, but you don't have...
It's more passive.
For Prot Paladin, it's more passive, while Warrior actually has reliable block chance. You are very mobile, which is something that Prot Paladin is fine with, but I feel...
It's not the most mobile. You have your pony, but that's kind of...
With the way that mobility... So, we're gonna get into Vengeance as well, but the leap-style mobility is probably better for tanks, because you don't have to go through a pack, or you can just reach a pack really quickly instead of traveling through ground effects and all of that stuff.
It's better, and it's way more fun. Let's be real.
And I mean,
there's nothing compared to that feeling. Just jumping down some packs.
And if you've ever played an RPG and you wanted to play a tank, obviously it makes sense to have a shield and put shield block up, which is probably why Prot Paladin and Prot Warriors are usually one of the better ones that we recommend, as opposed to stuff like Brewmaster and Bloody Cape, who are a little bit okay, these guys have big weapons. How do
different fantasy, for sure. But I guess it's fair to also place this into A tier. Once again, not too complicated, not too easy, just I think the right amount, and it's it makes sense. Its abilities make sense in terms of getting into spanking and tanking and spanking. You understand right from the get-go what the abilities do and how to use them. So this is why very recommended to play. Last on the list, Vengeance Demon Hunter. Speaking of jumping around and fulfilling that fantasy, cannot tell you how much fun I have just jumping on one pack, then on the other to get 2 of them and aggro them. I still feel like there's still some, if you don't have like Fell Devastation on, it's pretty complicated to like maintain aggro within a comp that has burst classes on. I guess that would be a drawback, because whenever I didn't have it available and I would pull a big pack and somebody would burst, was like, oh man, taunt that guy, do something, come on, to get the aggro back.
But when you get Devastation, you need to hear Marcelian&Flame and just go. It's
so fun, dude.
It's fun.
It's so fun, and you heal a lot through that damage, and you have the Spirit Bomb and that old like. It has, like, HPS-wise, I was looking at like, the lower dungeons we did while leveling, while gearing up for Season 2. And healing-wise, it's very, very good. Like, with all of the Spirit Bombs all around, it kind of gets there, and it maintains its sustainability.
And you were doing some really good damage that's without the tier set.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? You have, like, really good damage again with Fell Devastation, but also, like, you have, like, the amount of mobility, the amount of CCs, and also the fact that you are very useful, specifically last week with the whole incorporeal. The prison was excellent. You just saw it. You just placed it into a prison, so and that was instant.
Enables skips and all of that stuff.
You feel useful, yeah, for sure. And once again, demon spikes is pretty. It's so not complicated. Okay, you have to like be aware of your demon spikes, right? You always have to like watch out for your immolation roll in the long. Very useful with Chaos Brand for casters. You have like the silent stuff, like the pull and stuff.
You're definitely gonna get into groups. There's not. Yeah. Although Havoc is also a good spec, usually Vengeance might end up being a part of your group more, since there are a lot more DPS that are popular than Havoc Demon Hunter right now. So you'll actually get into groups. At least it should be, because, you know, Chaos Brand is really good for all those Destro Warlocks and Boom Kings.
Yeah, and there's a lot of melees who actually benefit from that as well. So, okay, we'll place this into A tier as well. I feel it's like very easy. I would say it's easier than the first two, Prot Paladin and Prot Warrior.
It might not be as tanky, I don't think.
Not as tanky, yes, that is true, because not too many defensives, let's be real. It's basically like more like this healing you do, the Spirit Bomb, and all that damage you do.
I think once you get a tier set, you'll probably have to play the Fiery Brand build.
Oh, for sure. I don't have the tier set yet, so I'm just, knocking it out of the park. But it still feels great, right?
Yeah.
Like if you have like a decent healer with you, and you kind of like manage your Fell Devastation and your Demon Spikes, you should be Gucci, not a big problem.
I think if you even play a DPS for a long time, if you're coming from a DPS player, this is probably the time that you might want to start
definitely, man. You definitely feel like a DPS who can take a hit. Now, this is kind of the final image on should you or should you not play a tank. Once again, on S and A tier, we have like all of the tanks that are easy to get into and easy to like just maintain to a level up until you want to get into that more complicated stuff. Obviously, each spec here, can all agree, can get a lot more complicated if you like wish to have a little bit more of a challenge.
We obviously didn't touch on what makes this, perform at the highest of levels. Usually we have dedicated videos for that as well, so we didn't really want to get into that. But for people who do want to start tanking, this is kind of what we recommend. It's easy to understand the concept of mitigating damage and rotating cooldowns and keeping aggro on packs. These are usually the tanks that have, a little bit more damage, a little bit more tankiness, and some tools, especially with Prot Paladin, to kind of, mitigate some errors that either you or your party does. So this is kind of how I think I can collectively hear all the bears are like this. Oh, bear S tier.
Yeah, it's fine, guys. It's fine. It's basically not related to meta, but, I think we try to make good points for each and every spec on why it should be or should not be played, okay? Now, Patreons, thank you so much for supporting the content. Once again, patreon.com/MarcelianOnline. The link is in the description. And thank you for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed this. If you did, let us know in the comments. Bye!
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I've been loving it then, I still love it now. Still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. Getting better every day, let me show you how. Cause still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. It's getting harder to stay, but at the end of the day, it's a guilty pleasure, so just log in and play. Whether it's classic or retail, I'ma do a /bow. Still, I play WoW.